The Past Comes Knocking, One Last Truth, by SeaSkate on ao3. Coach was talking, but Neil wasn't truly listening. This was a simple fact that shouldn't inspire too much attention, except because it's Neil, it does. The upperclassmen and the monsters that were truly anything but glanced at one another as they saw the youngest among them staring at his hands as if he saw something that none of the others could. Given what little they actually knew of the fine details of the teen's past after Baltimore, maybe he could. Neil got like this from time to time, cold, calculative, almost they all knew it, but it was always another thing to be so entirely reminded of it outside of the court where they saw it the most. "Okay, get your smelly asses out of here before I have you lot signed up for a marathon," Wymack threatened, but none of them truly believed it, though they all moved quickly to the shower despite their doubts. Most of them did anyways. When the Foxes came back arguing about where to go for the last team dinner before the new recruits came the following week, Neil was right where they had left him, a fact that made Andrew tut as he walked over to the rabbit to get his attention, but was stopped short at the sound of another's voice. "Any of you miscreants here know a Chuuya Nakahara?" All eyes turned to Kevin at the so clearly Japanese name given by Coach Wymack, but it was Neil that sprung to his feet with a silently lethal grace that none of them had seen the teen possess so clearly before. Hurried glances were exchanged as they all watched the red head go the way that Coach had come from, the court. Neil walked fast, his steps silent in a way that they hadn't been in over a year now as he moved, his senses too aware of everything to allow for anything else. Chuuya Nakahara. It was a name that he hadn't heard in over a year now, and her one that he somehow found himself missing like a lung, even if the air that had once filled it had been nothing but poison born from the port city. Vaguely he was aware of his teammates and Coach following behind him, of Andrew following him, but at that moment he couldn't find it in himself to care, not when his world was colliding with another. "You're in the wrong hemisphere, slug," the teen said, the Japanese rolling easily off of his tongue as if he had never stopped speaking it at all. Behind him, Neil could hear someone, Kevin most likely, suck in a pained breath as yet another secret unraveled before them all. The Foxes were shameless in their watching, following the striker all the way into the inner court. "And you're wearing the wrong face, mackerel." The mafioso was smiling as Neil drew nearer, gloved hands poised on his hips as his dark mafia clothes stood out like a stain against the vibrant shades of white and orange that everyone else and the court around them held. The older teen's hair had grown longer still since Neil had seen it last, laying gently on the side of his shoulder. The ex-player was surprised, but pleased nonetheless, to see that the other was still wearing the choker that he had given him when the other man had joined all those years ago. "What? You don't like my true look?" Neil asked with an obviously fake pout that made the Foxes glance at the teen strangely, not used to seeing him act in such a way even though they couldn't, for the most part, understand what was being said by either man. Andrew was looking at Kevin pointedly from time to time, but the taller man knew better than to say anything before he had all of the facts. "At least I grew some, which is more than I can say for you, short stack." "Why you?" Chuuya screamed as he tore through the air with a violent kick, but Neil was already moving with an agility and familiarity to the other man's moves that raised more than one brow from the spectators. The younger man laughed in a way that could almost be seen as honest. It drew all of the eyes to the striker, and was the only thing that stopped Andrew from drawing one of his knives from his bands at what had appeared to be an obvious display of aggression until then. Both him and Renee could feel the danger coming off of the newcomer in waves, something that Neil seemed to naturally match, but Nikki had the misfortune of missing it completely. Hot, rich, and flexible, the man cooed in a voice that Neil had heard directed at him before Nikki had learned that the striker could speak German. "I'd love to see what he could do in a more private setting." Andrew growled, his already strained temper flaring at his cousin's remark, but before he could do anything to the other, another was already in the taller man's face. "You should be more careful with your words, Nikki," Neil threatened, switching to German as well as the Foxes drew in a sharp breath and Andrew looked on with something just north of interest at the sight. "Wouldn't want to lose that tongue of yours, now would you?" The striker had a long knife in his hand that was unfamiliar to all but the teen that he'd nicked it from only a moment before. The blade was pressed dangerously against the older man's throat, a trickle of blood spilling purposefully from the cut that he'd put there. In moments like this it was hard to forget just where the striker came from. Nikki shivered and tried to say something, but that only made the blade cut deeper than it had before, something Neil was well aware of. "What was that?" he taunted. And then there was a cool touch on the former mafioso's neck, leather pressing firmly against skin as Chuuya moved into his partner's blind side. The touch was enough to remind the younger teen of just where he was and for Neil to pull back, holding the blade out to the other redhead to take back. "Sorry, Chibi," the striker said in a voice that let the other teen know that he clearly wasn't sorry for the theft at all, but was thankful for the other stepping in nonetheless. "Whatever, bastard," the mafia executive grumbled, switching to English as well, much to the other's surprise, as he took the offered blade. Neil didn't look at his teammates, but he knew their reactions all the same, the shocked faces of the upperclassmen, the harsh pull of Kevin's lips into a pained frown, the openly displayed hatred on Aaron's face, the confusion on Coach's, and most painfully, the betrayal in Andrew's eyes that mirrored the fear in Nikki's. "Looks like the monster has been rubbing off on him a little too much," Allison whispered, but everyone that heard her only glared at the woman who only shrugged in turn. "Why are you here, Chuuya?" the former mafioso asked at last. The man in question glanced around at the audience that they still had gathered around the pair, the unsaid question obvious in his piercing gaze. "They already know almost everything else, keep to English." "Your funeral, bandage waist," the other ability user sighed and shook his head. "Boss has a job for you." The foxes glanced at one another in confusion, but the striker plowed on ignoring them for the moment. "I don't work for that piece of shit anymore," Neil reminded the other coldly, his voice tight with a kind of grief that only the other mafioso and Andrew could hear. "He saw to that, so bye-bye now. Hope your plane crashes." Neil turned to leave, but Chuuya had expected this, and so had Mori. "Fyodor Dervosky," the mafioso called. It wasn't a name that anyone but the pair knew, but the foxes could see the weight of it as the striker stopped short immediately before it was even fully out of the other redhead's mouth. "He's in the States, boss thought that you'd want to see to your dear chess partner yourself." Neil turned, a sharp look on his lips that reminded everyone else of a predator. "Faida," the teen said, tasting the name on his lips once more. "What exactly does Mori want, and what is the bastard willing to pay?" Chuuya smirked, not used to seeing the bastard fold so easily. "He just wants you to go and play your little chess game with the fucking rat, then you're free. He'll remove my name from all secession documents and pick a new executive. Already has them gathered to do just that, he's just waiting for the confirmation," Chuuya informed. "Do this and you can play your little stickball with your pathetic excuse for a mafia pulling your strings all that you'll let them." Kevin choked at the insult to the organization that he had spent so long fearing, but he went absolutely white at Neil's response to it. "They are pretty pathetic, aren't they?" the other striker asked, his tone mocking as everyone else stared in disbelief at what they were hearing. "Wouldn't last a day in the Demon City. And yet they're still around after a full year of you being here," Chuuya mused, clearly enjoying the other's pain in the way that a sibling might like seeing the straight-A brother get a B. "You're losing your edge already?" But Neil did not rise to the oh-so-tempting bait. "Rules are different here," the XE player reminded the mafioso, as if the other could possibly forget. "I'm sorry to interrupt whatever this is," Dan broke in, waving her hand weakly between the two mafiosos, "but what the hell is going on here?" Aaron scoffed. "Isn't it obvious?" he asked, condescension thick in his voice. "Jocelyn here is going to go and kill this Fyodor guy." The fox's eyes tore to the man in question, but it was true and they knew it, so he just shrugged. "Jocelyn," Coach Wymack started, but was cut off. "Above your pay grade, Coach," the striker said coldly as the two redheads pushed through the crowd, Andrew close behind them, unwilling to let Neil go alone. The three walked to the boys' locker room, only stopping for a moment for the mafioso to grab the bag that he had stashed in the bleachers. Chuuya tried to close the door before the blonde could come in, but an identical glare from both of the other men made him stop. "The mackerel really does have a heart then," the mafioso laughed at the sight of the two standing close to one another, but not touching. "And here I thought all your emotion was spent on those interviews. You were in fine form with those, by the way." Hiratsu was proud. The ability user threw the bag at the other's feet. Change and I'll tell you what we've been able to gather. Andrew glanced at Neil, waiting for the other teen to go to one of the stalls to change as he always did with others around, but the striker was already pulling his shirt off and casting it aside, scars on full display. There really was no point in attempting to hide them when the other mafioso had been the one to patch up at least half of them. Bandages? Neil asked as he tore through the bag for what he knew would be in there. Never mind, found them, the teen said, holding a shopping bag of white rolls of bandages like a sort of prize. Andrew watched for a moment as the striker considered something and felt a small pang when their identical black armbands were peeled off of the other, but made up for it by being the one to wrap the offending bandages around the younger man's body as the third killer in the room spoke. By the time that Chuuya was done reading from the report, the visage of the demon prodigy was staring back at him, though the nasty lines running down the other's cheek and the coloring of his hair and eyes was wrong, the effect was still the same. The eye that was visible was still just as cold as they had always been. Chuuya fought back a smile at the sight. He'd missed his partner. There's a gun in the side pocket. Of course. Spare sniper bullets for you too, right, L? Chuuya only nodded. The former mafioso slipped the gun into the holster at his side, hidden beneath the long coat that was a perfect replica of the one that he'd watched burn so beautifully only about a year before. This one would burn just as prettily too, the striker knew. Andrew looked at the man that seemed to live on secrets and nothing more. The busybodies will have questions, he reported boredly. Neil nodded. I'll answer them all when I get back. Last secret? The goalkeeper asked, his voice as flat as ever, but Neil knew that there was more there. Last secret, the former mafioso confirmed. 110%. Neil came back 2 days later with blood on his skin and the smell of smoke lingering on his mafia clothes, a grumbling mafioso following behind him. That was the night that the Foxes learned of the world of ability users and saw too for themselves. They learned of ruthless organizations that break children to fulfill their own ends, and of the promise that a child had made and his reasons for continuing to survive. To learn to live. The Foxes could never look at Neil the same again, not without seeing the side of him that had drawn the monster in to begin with, but that was okay, because now they knew that every soft gesture and seemingly thoughtless touch meant more than it had before. Everything was a whisper of "I'm trying," and they were willing to help him learn to scream it. They knew now that their friend's path was something inevitable for the sticker. He'd been made for death, one way or another. But they wanted to help him hold his promise to try to become a good man, to help him stay Neil and leave all of the other identities buried. The Foxes wouldn't be foxes if they got what they deserved, but in their messed up excuse for a family, they knew that they could carve out a place for themselves.